white in the first game.
Yep. And hopefully there aren't any big tactical blunders for Wesley, because Fabiano is actually poised to win the majority of those games, Danny. I'm telling you.
Loving it, bringing in the insights. Okay, and a pretty peaceful opening in the first game, a Moscow variation, I think it's called, bishop b5 check. And both of them adopting the same kind of pawn structure with these c4, d3, e4 pawns clamping down on the d5 square.
Yeah, and I think the move e5 is, let's say, a little bit of a surprise already, and Fabiano's going for a very specific maneuver, because otherwise I think it's clear that white just holds a small edge. You've got all the pawns fixed, light squares for white, dark squares for black. That's going to favor that bishop on c1 over the bishop on d8, which is why I think he was trying to get that bishop to a5.
Yeah, and he was also making space for the g8 knight to move to e7. I think he's also orienting himself around the f5 pawn break, because Wesley's already got very clear-cut play on the queen side. He's already centralized his knight. I'm also a bit surprised in e5, and I don't think Fabio's gotten a great position here out of the opening.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something that he's trying for this type of position in general, or if he's just going to try it for one game. And then obviously there are a lot of main lines that he can go back to. So it could just be game one, seeing where Wesley's at and how he's going to play these positions, because very aggressive approach by Fabiano with the knight on g6, already opening the f5.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned other variations to go back to. No, I think Wesley's refuted the Sicilian. I think that's it. Time to move to e5. Okay, so Fabi has gone f5. What I'm concerned about is that if Wesley takes it, first of all, you can't really take with the queen because you're going to drop b7. But if you take with the rook, okay, bishop e3, then the knight can swing around to e4. I'm not seeing how the f-file is giving giving black enough counterplay to compensate for all these weaknesses. And this is what we're seeing, Wesley going bishop e3. I'm anticipating knight d2.
Yes, knight d2 to e4 looks fantastic. He's already got it on the board, and he's all over those light squares there. And don't forget, Fabiano's going to need to spend a move at some point, because that rook on a8, I mean, it can't join the action. It can't get over to f8, double on the f-file without wasting move, like bishop e7, bishop c7. Something's got to give.
Someone's put the bishop on d8. I wonder who it was.
Yeah,
who did that? Why would they do that? Okay, knight c7 was a nice move, kicking the knight out of d5. But Wesley's in no hurry. You know, retreating moves like these are totally normal. He is going to put the other knight on e4, I think. And yeah, Fabi needs to coordinate his pieces somehow. Maybe even bishop c7 and rook a f8. But he can't have half of his pieces just sleeping it away on the queen side.
Right, and white seems to have a great setup so far. I mean, if the knight ever goes to d4, white's often just going to be capturing it with the bishop. If the knight goes to f5 in the future and captures the bishop on e3, white's even satisfied playing f takes e3. That pawn takes control of the f4 and d4 squares. So I'm not really seeing how Fabiano generates things, as Wesley kind of has a nice, easy outlook for the next couple of moves.
Yeah, he does, and this is reflected in the amount of time that Fabi is taking. I
saw his connection bar just flash for a second.
Oh, maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah.
Queen g4 here also looks pretty tempting, by the way. Just pinning the rook, knight d4. Wesley has a much easier game.
And I love the move g3, if we can get that in soon for Wesley. Something like g3, h4, your move queen g4. I feel like Wesley's all over this position.
Yeah, but Fabi trying to do something about that, striking in the center with d5. That doesn't change the sort of fundamental superiority of white's pieces here, but it does give Fabi's position some life. After takes, white's going to be left with a slightly weak pawn on d3. I mean, I like the move d5, I think. And the eval bar doesn't seem too concerned. So I guess objectively black is fine here, but obviously Fabi has to be very careful.
Right. And the way that he prefaced that with c takes b4 is so good, because after d5 now, if white plays c d5, you're going to have this d and b pawn that are, you know, on their own, maybe a little bit weak, especially on d3. So Fabiano also has weaknesses that he can target. I'm just concerned with that rook on f5. It kind of feels like maybe the f-file isn't the best place to be doubled anymore.
Right, and also that square in particular, it's x-rayed by the queen, knight g3. Whenever your rooks are sticking out like that, you're always prone to certain kinds of tactics. Wesley, on the other hand, I think is going to double on the c-file and potentially infiltrate with his queen to c7. This depends on Fabi's reaction. It goes knight f4. So Wesley can take, but then takes, guess pawn takes is not the end of the world for black.
Yep. Yeah, you could also just take back with the pawn and sort of leave the pawn on d3. It feels like he's obviously evaluated that he's pretty satisfied with that exchange because of the weaknesses of the pawns.
Yeah, and even though the opening hasn't gone great for him, in the early going, Fabi seems so sharp in the last 2 matches. He's finding these moves really quickly. Knight f4 was a nice move. He's very confident in his decision making, and he hasn't gotten into that much time pressure.
Correct.
In his matches so far.
Because that's where it gets concerning. I think it's fair to admit that Fabi's not that he's not the most accurate, but he's not the most confident. Where even the best players in the world, as we've seen in the SAC, can make, 1,000 level mistakes. Time travel will make you look bad.
Yes, it will. And the question is, will queen c7 make black look bad? I don't think so. Queen c7, there's rook d7. And this is not mate. In fact, the queen gets trapped. It's kind of a funny line. I didn't even notice that at first.
It's very much not mate.
Wesley going rook d2, which honestly is a sign that Fabi has gotten all of his pieces into the game. Wesley has not really made anything happen, out of his central control. White is still obviously fine, but I think the position is closer to equality now.
And the interesting thing is that I've been kind of looking for g3 for a while, but if you play g3, I'm not sure you're even threatening anything. Like the bishop is now trapped because of that rook d2 move. So
wow.
It's like, yeah, even if he does do g3, you might just be able to ignore it.
That's a pretty deflating feeling when you attack one of your opponent's pieces and he doesn't even have to move it back. You just leave it there. Yeah. And
where he can
Wesley
also
now
let
down
you have 2 moves.
Right. Wesley down to a minute and a half. He goes b5, sort of deep freezing these pawns, a common technique.
That's
I like
good
that move.
Positional move against the a pawn. Now there's always a rook a1, rook a2 move that can happen. And look for it in the future of this game. Wesley, as long as he has an escape square for his king, he'll be okay if the queens are traded, sort of giving up that d3 pawn and trading it for the a pawn. Because once the a pawn's gone, the b6 pawn is weak, and white's structure on the king side is always going to be better due to that weakness on e5 for black.
Yeah, and that's why I always tell people not to be really, not to put too much stock into this question of where you should place your pawns in relation to your opponent's bishop. Sometimes it's a good idea to place them on the same pawn, on the same color squares, because it limits the bishop. But sometimes, as here, it's a bad thing, because if the a7 pawn is eliminated, the b6 pawn is going to be a sitting duck for the white bishop, right? So it really depends on the specifics of the position. Now, can black take d3 here immediately? I think that's what Fabi's calculating. Takes, here. I think white doesn't win the knight. But as you said, maybe white should forget about the knight and attack the a pawn instead, to something like this.
But I almost get scared of a position like this where, imagine that all the rooks and queens trade off and somehow the knight gets traded for the dark squared bishop for white. I'm worried about maybe losing an endgame as black, even though I'm up a pawn, because the pawn I'm up is on a7 and I can't move it.
Well, yeah, that's the power of the sort of the deep freeze, because a5 is always met with an en passant, which I was going to show really quickly before he's made a move. There we go. Bishop b4, rook d1, maybe bishop a5 to plug the a file.
Right.
Is an option. Actually, that might be a very good option.
I thought that was his plan, but maybe now he's reevaluating things, and he's decided to go rook d7. White can't double the way that maybe previously was a threat with rook d1 because of this inserted move bishop b4. It's kind of clever.
Yeah, rook a4. What are we missing? I mean, bishop a5 looks very natural.
Oh, rook a3 and bishop. Ooh, I was gonna say bishop g5,
but then the knight can move
the knight somewhere.
Right, just c1. You can actually play knight c1. Actually, that might be the best move. Oh my goodness.
That's how good the position is for black.
That is, and that's how powerful back rank tactics are. It's one of the most powerful tactical concepts because it's totally crippling. When your back rank is weak, that is literally the only thing you have to care about. You can't take any of your opponent's pieces.
Yeah. And that's what's
that was a funny progression
here. Yeah, Knight c1 actually is amazing.
I don't like his internet. He's got one bar. Then he wrench.
Yeah, he doesn't have the best position and he doesn't have the best internet. So trust me, it's not a good combo.
It's a double whammy. And it's funny that what you predicted has come true with Fabi taking the d3 pawn to go into an endgame, but I'm not too concerned for white here. And maybe it's time to go g3. Stop the knight from escaping back to f4, although apparently the knight can go absolutely anywhere with impunity.
It's true. He's not concerned.
Rook fd8, h4, improving typical endgame move, and Fabi moves the knight back.
Yep. And
threatening mate.
You take everything here probably, and I don't know, king e2 and just play that endgame.
Yeah, although that b5 pawn can become a weakness. It can be attacked by a rook on d5, which is a likely move here. Yep.
Yeah, I get the feeling in this position that white is going to have really good compensation just because you can plant the rook on b7. It's behind the b pawn. There's no way that b pawn really becomes a queen. It's just, you know, way too convoluted to achieve. And yeah, look at the weird moves that black has to play just to like hang on to his position. Right.
Black really has to contort himself to defend this pawn and that pawn. White's playing for the initiative here, no question about it. I think Fabi should be able to hold this. Though objectively, it's obviously a draw. And I like the way Fabi didn't care too much about his f pawn. Don't miss knight f6.
Right. And there's g4, h5, just, you know, taking squares away from the king starts to become a little scary in time pressure.
I don't love king g6. I feel like it falls into a future g4, h5, although Fabi can always meet g4 with h5 himself. So maybe he's fine, but he's got 1 second. He's got to move. Oh my goodness, he's going to flag.
He disconnected.
Oh no.
I don't know if it shows on your screen, but for me, I saw red bar.
I didn't see the bar, but I mean, it's obvious that he just disconnected. And that is a very deflating way to lose the first game.
Yeah, it's like, welcome to the match, Fabiano.
Right.